The first thing that went wrong wasn't the restaurant. It wasn't the man waiting inside. It was the way my son wouldn't look at me while he was driving. The car moved through traffic like it knew where it was going even if I didn't. Red light, green light. The tires hummed. The city slid past the windows. My son's hands were locked around the steering wheel, knuckles pale, tendons standing out like wires pulled too tight. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed straight ahead. And the radio stayed off, dead quiet in a way that made every breath sound too loud. Something in my chest tightened, slow and deliberate. I pressed my purse against my stomach and felt my breathing shorten, not from fear yet, but from recognition. I had already said no earlier that day. I said it gently first, then clearly, then firmly. Still, here we were, moving forward, my refusal shrinking smaller in the rearview mirror with every block we passed. "You'll be fine, Mom," my son said, voice calm, careful, almost soothing. "It's just dinner. One night. You deserve to be happy again." Happy again. The phrase landed wrong. Too smooth. Too practiced. Like a sentence that had been rehearsed until it stopped sounding like truth. I didn't answer. Silence has weight when you let it sit, and I let it sit heavy between us. At the next light, he reached over and covered my hand with his warm, familiar, steady. The touch softened me in the wrong place. It reminded me of the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives, trusting me to keep him safe. Memory can be a lever. It moved me even when logic couldn't. I nodded once. Small. Final. My name is Bernice Holloway, and I've lived long enough to know that danger doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it arrives polite. Sometimes it wears love on its face and speaks in the voice of your own child. My husband had been gone 4 years of learning how to breathe inside quiet, how to stand in my own life without being pushed forward by other people's timelines. I wasn't broken. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't lonely in the way people like to fix. But my son spoke like my stillness was a problem he needed to solve. Halfway there, he finally said the man's name. Damon Price. He said it casually, like a detail that didn't matter. He said the man was respectful. Solid. Someone he trusted. The word trust appeared again. Smoothed over like a surface he wanted me to lean on without testing its strength. My fingers brushed my keys out of habit, the small ritual I do when I want to know where my exit is. After that, he talked too much. He explained where he'd be during the dinner, how close he'd stay, how I could leave whenever I wanted, how this was all very simple and very safe. The explanations came fast, stacked on top of each other like he was afraid silence might undo something. That detail lodged in my chest and stayed there. When I told him I would walk out if I felt uncomfortable, he agreed too quickly, then softened his tone like he was correcting himself. We pulled into a parking lot I would never have chosen alone. Warm light spilled from tall windows. Laughter floated out when the doors opened. People stepped inside with easy faces, coats loose, bodies relaxed. This was supposed to be normal, harmless. My son parked, leaned across the console, and hugged me tight. The hug lasted a beat longer than it should have. His voice dropped low when he spoke, almost pleading. I nodded because refusing would have required more strength than I had left in that moment. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know where this story found you, because moments like this don't care where you are, they only care that you're listening. Cold air brushed my cheeks as we walked toward the entrance. The door swung open and sound rushed out. Music, cutlery, voices, heat. The smell of food wrapped around me, rich and heavy. A waiter in a crisp black apron stepped forward immediately. His smile was polite, professional, and stopped just short of his eyes. He glanced past me for the briefest second, like he was checking the room, then looked back at my face. "Mrs. Holloway," he said softly, not as a question, as confirmation. And right there, before I sat down, before I met the man my son trusted, before a single drink touched the table, I understood something I couldn't yet explain. This dinner hadn't started tonight. Damon Price rose the moment I reached the table, smooth as a man who had practiced standing up with the right amount of respect. His suit fit him well, without looking loud. His smile arrived fast and stayed steady like it belonged there. He pulled my chair out before I could touch it, and when I sat, he leaned in just enough to feel considerate, not enough to feel familiar. "Miss Holloway," he said, and the way he pronounced it made my stomach tighten. Too careful, too polished, like he'd been told exactly how to address me. I returned the smallest smile I could manage without offending him and laid my purse on my lap the way I always do when I want my hands to have an excuse to stay close. The waiter, Miles, reappeared like he had been assigned to our section on purpose. His eyes flicked to Damon, then back to me. The movement was quick, but it made something in me settle lower, quieter. Miles asked if we were ready to order, and Damon answered before I opened my mouth. "We are," he said. "She'll start with the salmon, and I'll have the steak." Then he turned toward me as if that settled it. "I heard you like salmon," he added lightly, like it was a harmless detail picked up in passing. I didn't correct him. I just held his gaze, calm and even. "You heard that," I repeated, and kept my voice gentle on purpose. Damon chuckled, not startled, not embarrassed, almost pleased. "Calvin said you don't like heavy meals," he replied. "Said you're particular about how things sit." The word particular landed in a place that didn't feel friendly. It felt like a label, like a file note. I watched his hands while he talked. Clean nails. No rings. His fingers didn't fidget, which should have read as confidence, but it read to me like control. "So," he said, "I know these kinds of dinners can feel awkward, but I've always admired women who hold a family together. For years is a long time to carry everything alone." He said 4 years like it was a fact he'd memorized, not a part of my life he'd earned. I felt my mouth stay polite while my chest tightened. People who know grief don't use it as conversation starter. They let it sit until it finds its own way out. "Calvin talks," I said, not accusing, just stating. Damon smiled wider. "Only good things," he assured me. "He cares about you. That's rare. You raised him right." Praise has a way of trying to soften a person before it reaches for something else. I nodded once and reached for my water, buying myself a second of quiet. Across the room, I could see Calvin hovering near the edge of our section like he wasn't sure whether to stay or leave. When my eyes met his, he forced a smile that didn't touch his face. He lifted 2 fingers in a small wave, then turned his body toward the entrance as if someone had called him without calling his name. Damon kept speaking, easy, charming, stacking compliments and little observations like he was building a bridge to make me cross. He asked about church in a way that sounded rehearsed. He mentioned your garden, even though I had never told Calvin about the garden I stopped tending after my husband died. "I hear you like quiet mornings," he said, tilting his head as if he could see me in them. "You seem like the type who appreciates peace." The way he said peace made it sound like something he wanted to sell me, not something he respected. Miles returned with a notepad and asked about drinks. I opened my mouth to say water again, but Damon slid smoothly into the space. "She'll try the house cocktail," he said, smiling at me as if I'd already agreed. "It's light. You'll love this." The words were soft, almost playful, but there was something underneath them that pressed. A tiny assumption, a tiny ownership. I kept my face pleasant. "Actually, I began." Miles didn't look at Damon when he spoke. He kept his eyes on me. Of course, he said quietly, like he was giving me back my choice without making a scene. Damon laughed, easy, and lifted his hands. No pressure, he said. I just thought it might help you relax. Relax. The word floated between us like a suggestion and a command at the same time. I felt the back of my neck warm, not from the room, but from awareness. A person doesn't need to shout to steer you. Sometimes all they do is smile and act like the decision was made before you arrived. I glanced toward the entrance again. Calvin was on his phone now, turned slightly away, shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. He wasn't watching us. He was listening to something, jaw tight, nodding once as if he didn't want whoever was speaking to hear his voice. Then he stepped outside. The glass door shut behind him, and the restaurant noise swallowed the moment like it never happened. Damon followed my gaze and gave a small, knowing smile. He's protective, he said. He just wants you to have a good time. Something about the way he said it, good time, felt wrong. Too smooth, too practiced, like he'd been told exactly which words would sound harmless. I sat back, still smiling, still polite, and felt my body make a quiet decision without consulting my emotions. I needed air. I needed a moment away from Damon's careful eyes, and the way the room suddenly felt arranged around me. I placed my napkin on the table with steady hands. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I'll be right back." And as I stood, Damon's smile held, but his eyes tracked me all the way until I disappeared toward the restroom. The restroom light was too bright, the mirror too honest. I washed my hands longer than I needed to, not because they were dirty, but because the quiet gave me something the table did not, space to breathe without being watched. My reflection looked composed, lips pressed gently together, eyes steady, the kind of face people mistake for comfort. I patted my hands dry, adjusted the collar of my coat, and told myself I was leaving the moment I returned. I would sit, say something polite, and walk out with my dignity intact. I did not owe anyone my time just because they dressed their intentions in courtesy. When I stepped into the hallway, the noise of the dining room swelled again, forks against plates, soft laughter, glasses clinking. I kept my steps measured, chin lifted, the way my mother taught me to move when I felt unsure. Halfway back to the table, a server cart rolled past me, close enough that the edge of it brushed my coat. The waiter's shoulder bumped mine, barely a touch, like an accident. "Excuse me," he murmured. His hand met mine for a second, just a second, and something small and folded was pressed into my palm. I didn't stop walking. I didn't look down. I didn't change pace. I carried my hand like it was empty until I reached the table and slid back into my chair. Damon lifted his eyes, smile ready, and for the first time I noticed how quickly he watched everything. Not just me, the room, the entrance, the aisle behind me. He looked like a man enjoying a meal, but his attention moved like someone listening for a cue. "You all right?" he asked, voice smooth, concern placed neatly on top. "I'm fine," I said, and let the word land gentle, ordinary. My purse remained on my lap. My fingers curled around the paper, sweating into it. I reached for my napkin with my free hand, unfolded it with care, and draped it across my knees the way I always do. Under the cover of that familiar motion, I slipped the folded paper beneath the napkin, opened it with my thumb, and read it one small line at a time. "Don't take that drink." I saw what he did. My body reacted before my mind could give it permission. My throat tightened. The room sharpened at the edges. I felt heat rush up my neck, felt my pulse in my fingertips like a warning bell no one else could hear. For a second, my lungs forgot their rhythm. I held still, not frozen in fear, but in calculation, like a woman standing at the curb when she hears a car speeding too fast around the corner. Damon was talking again, telling a story about his work, laughing softly at his own timing. His voice became background noise. I kept my face pleasant, the way you do when you are trying to survive a moment without alerting the person across from you. I didn't look at the drink. I didn't touch it. I kept both hands on my lap under the napkin, paper folded small again, my fingers pressing the crease until it felt like a decision. Miles passed our table once, carrying a tray for another section, and his eyes met mine for half a second. There was no drama in his face, no hero energy, no warning expression, just a quiet, steady look that said he had done what he could. And now what happened next belonged to me. Damon's drink sat nearer to him. Mine sat nearer to me. That simple arrangement suddenly felt like a line drawn on the table. I could hear my husband's voice in the back of my mind. Not words, just the memory of how he used to watch a room when something felt off. I had always admired that about him, the way he moved with patience before he moved with force. I understood it now in a different way. Loud fear would not save me. A scene would not save me. A sharp accusation would only give Damon space to adjust. I lifted my eyes to his and smiled wider, as if his story had finally amused me. I nodded at the right moments. I let my shoulders relax, just enough to look comfortable. Damon's gaze softened, but it didn't leave my hands. He watched my mouth when I spoke, watched my throat when I swallowed, watched the table like he was counting down something I couldn't see. I glanced once, casually, toward the entrance. Through the glass, I could see the outline of Calvin outside, phone pressed to his ear, head turned away from the room, like he didn't want to be noticed. That sight didn't explain anything, but it tightened the knot inside me. My son was nearby. Yet I felt alone at that table, alone in a way that had nothing to do with widowhood. I slid the note deeper into my purse without looking down, tucked it under my wallet like it had always belonged there. Then I smoothed my napkin as if nothing had changed, and leaned forward slightly, giving Damon the kind of smile that makes men feel safe. My heart was beating hard, but my voice stayed soft. My face stayed warm. My fear stayed hidden where it could be useful. That's when I lifted the wrong glass, on purpose. I held the glass lightly, not lifting it yet, just letting my fingers rest against the cool stem as if I was deciding whether I wanted to taste it. My smile stayed in place, calm and friendly, but underneath the table my foot was planted like a brace. Damon kept talking, voice smooth, eyes bright, the kind of charm that wants you to forget your own instincts. He leaned back in his chair, like he owned the moment, like he was waiting for something to happen and trusting it would. I nodded at the right times and let my laughter come out small, polite. My body did the opposite of what my mind was doing. On the outside, I was a woman at dinner, listening, easing into conversation. On the inside, I was counting breaths, counting movements, reading his hands the way you read a storm from the trees before the first drop falls. Miles moved through the dining room with a tray balanced on one hand. He never looked like he was watching, but I felt him in the same way you feel a person standing behind you without turning around. Presence. Quiet. Alert. He passed our table, set a plate down for another couple, and his eyes slid in my direction for half a second, then away again. Nothing dramatic, just a thread of connection that didn't belong in a normal dinner. Damon's glass sat near his right hand. Mine was closer to me. The distance between them wasn't much, but it felt like a boundary. My throat was dry. I could have asked for water again, could have called Miles over, could have stood up and walked out. But walking out would make Damon's attention sharpen. It would give him a reason to move, to follow, to adjust. It would make this public in a way I wasn't ready to handle without knowing what I was dealing with. I needed the next thing to happen while we were still surrounded by strangers and bright lights and witnesses who didn't know they were witnesses yet. Damon smiled, like he could sense me weighing my options. "You look good tonight," he said, soft enough to sound sincere. Calvin told me you've been through a lot, but I can see you're strong. He said strong like it was a compliment, but it landed like a test, like he was measuring whether I was sturdy enough to carry whatever he planned without breaking too loudly. I tilted my head and gave him a look that made men feel clever. You talk a lot, I said, playful. You must have a drink to match all that confidence. He laughed, easy and warm, and lifted his glass slightly. Guilty, he said. I've got one already. I murmured, as if I was considering him the way he wanted to be considered. Then I lifted my own glass just a little, not toward my lips, just up into the space between us. This one looks pretty, I said, like an older woman indulging herself. I don't usually drink cocktails. You should, Damon said. His eyes dipped to the glass, then back to my face. It'll help you relax. Relax again. The same word. The same gentle push. I let my smile widen, like I decided to be daring for the first time in years. If it's so good, I said lightly, try mine first. Just a sip. You can tell me if it's too sweet. I made it sound like a joke, like I didn't want to waste money on something I wouldn't like. A small, ordinary excuse. The kind of thing women say every day, without thinking. Damon's eyebrows lifted, amused. He leaned forward, chuckling, and reached toward my glass like it was nothing. His hand moved with casual confidence. And for a moment my stomach rolled, the sharp physical awareness of how close danger can sit to you while smiling. My fingers loosened at the same time his fingers closed around the stem. The contact was brief, passing from my hand to his like a shared napkin, like an innocent little exchange. My hand trembled, just once, small enough that it could be mistaken for nerves. I kept my face steady, so he wouldn't see what that tremble meant. Across the room, Miles stopped near the service station. He wasn't staring, but his body angled slightly toward our table, like he was waiting to see whether I would stand up or stay seated. Damon lifted the glass, still laughing, and brought it toward his mouth. You're something, he said, voice warm like he liked the idea of me being unsure. Like he liked being the one to guide me. The glass touched his lips. Through the front window, I saw Calvin return. He pushed the door open too quickly, like the air outside had been chasing him. His face was tight, eyes scanning the room until they found me. He paused when he saw Damon, holding my glass. For a split second, Calvin's expression looked like a man arriving one moment late to something he can't name. He forced his mouth into a smile and started walking toward us, but his steps were uneven, hesitant, then rushed, then controlled again. I kept my own face calm, still smiling at Damon, still playing the part. Damon took a sip, swallowed, and laughed as if I'd just done something charming. See, he said, not bad at all. His laughter sounded normal for exactly one heartbeat longer. Then it shifted. Not a full stop, not a dramatic choke. Just a slight hitch in the middle of the sound, like his body had bumped into something it didn't expect. And right there, in the middle of his sentence, his laughter faltered. Damon's smile stayed on his face for a second after the laugh broke, like his body hadn't told his expression the truth yet. Then his eyes blinked hard, once, twice, and his hand tightened around the glass as if he needed something solid to hold him in place. He tried to speak again, mouth opening on a word that didn't come out right. The sound that followed wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that, small and confused, like a man who didn't understand why his own tongue had stopped obeying him. Hey, I said softly, still smiling, still calm, as if I was teasing him. My voice came out gentle on purpose. You all right? He nodded too quickly. He swallowed, and the swallow looked painful. A thin sheen of sweat appeared along his forehead, like it had been switched on. His shoulders rose once, stiff then settled as if he was trying to breathe through something heavy. He set the glass down, but his fingers didn't let go right away. They lingered around it, clawing for control. Across the room, I saw Miles freeze near the service station, tray halfway lifted, eyes locked on Damon's face. Not fear, not shock, alertness, like he'd seen the beginning before, and knew what it usually looked like when it finished. Damon's gaze flicked toward me, then past me, scanning the room as if he expected something to move against him. His lips parted again. He started. Then his head dipped forward, slow at first, like a man nodding off. His chin hit his chest. His elbows slid on the table. A beat of silence landed. So heavy, the whole restaurant seemed to feel it at once. And then, like a string snapped, his body slumped fully, shoulders folding, torso tipping, his cheek brushing the tablecloth. The sound of the impact wasn't loud. The reaction was. A woman at the next table gasped sharp. Chairs scraped. Silverware clattered. Someone shouted, "Sir," and another voice yelled, "Call somebody." The room rushed toward us in a wave. Servers, diners, faces turning into wide eyes. Damon's chair shifted as a server grabbed his shoulder, trying to sit him upright. His arms hung strangely, weightless in a way that didn't match the man who had been laughing just moments ago. Calvin appeared at my side, like he'd been launched. "Mom," he said, and the word cracked. His hands hovered over Damon, unsure where to touch, unsure whether touching would make it worse. His face was pale under the warm lights. He looked at Damon, then at me, then back at Damon again, like his mind couldn't hold one picture at a time. "I need space," Miles snapped, not at me, not at Calvin, but at the crowd gathering too close. For the first time his voice had an edge. He dropped his tray and leaned in, checking Damon's breathing the way a person does when they don't want to waste time explaining themselves. Another server ran for the manager. A phone appeared in someone's hand. I heard the words ambulance tossed into the air like a prayer and a threat at the same time. I stayed seated, not because I didn't care, because moving would make people look at me, and I needed their eyes on Damon. I needed the moment to belong to what was happening to him, not to how I reacted. My hands rested on my lap, steady as stone. My heart was loud, but I kept it inside. Calvin's knees bent like he might drop beside Damon. What happened?" he stammered, looking at me with a panic that felt too big for a simple date gone wrong. He reached for my wrist. His fingers were cold. "Mom, did you drink anything?" "No," I said, and my voice didn't shake. Miles' gaze cut to mine for a brief second. In that look, I understood something I didn't want to understand. This was never meant to end with Damon's cheek against the tablecloth. This was meant to end with mine. The manager arrived, a man with slick hair and a practiced calm. That wasn't calm at all. He started issuing instructions fast. "Clear the aisle. Give him air. Someone guide the paramedics in." One of the staff hovered near Damon's chair, eyes darting around the floor like they were searching for something they couldn't name. Then the server who'd been clearing plates near us crouched and reached under the table. "What is this?" she muttered, and her voice turned tight. She held up something small between two fingers, crumpled foil, the kind that should not belong under a dinner table. The room went quieter again, not fully silent, but wary. The manager's face changed. He didn't ask questions out loud. He simply turned and looked toward the ceiling corners, then toward the back office. "We have cameras," he said sharply, more to his staff than to us. "Save that footage. Now, don't touch anything else." Police arrived before the paramedics. Or maybe it only felt that way because time had started moving in pieces. 2 officers stepped into the restaurant with the kind of presence that makes conversations die mid-sentence. They spoke to the manager first. I watched their eyes sweep the room, sweep the table, sweep Damon on the floor. One officer nodded toward the crumpled foil in the server's hand. The other said, "Keep everyone here." When the paramedics finally came in, they moved fast, efficient, voices low. They placed pads on Damon's chest, lifted his legs, checked his pulse, spoke to each other in short, clipped phrases that didn't give the rest of us comfort. Calvin backed away as if his body had finally realized it couldn't fix this with worry alone. He stumbled toward me, bending close. His mouth came near my ear. His breath smelled like fear. His voice dropped to a whisper, so thin it almost disappeared into the noise of the restaurant. "Mom," he said, and his throat worked hard around the word. "I swear I didn't know." They didn't call it an interrogation. Not out loud, but that's what it felt like the moment the officers began moving people around the restaurant like pieces on a board. One officer stood near the entrance with his arms folded, keeping anyone from slipping out. Another spoke quietly to the manager, while a third started asking names, voices, addresses, questions that sound harmless until you realize you're answering them under bright lights with your heart still racing. Damon was already gone by the time they separated us. Paramedics had lifted him onto a stretcher, straps tightened, his head lolling slightly the way a person's head does when they aren't holding themselves up anymore. His eyes never opened. His mouth was slack. It looked like sleep, but it didn't feel like sleep. It felt like a body refusing to cooperate with its own life. Calvin tried to follow the stretcher out, and an officer stopped him with one palm raised, gentle but firm. "Sir, we need you to stay," the officer said. Calvin's face crumpled for a second, then hardened as if he didn't know which emotion would keep him standing. He looked back at me, helpless, and I held his gaze long enough to steady him without saying a word. Then they guided me toward a quieter corner, away from the tables, away from the crowd's hungry curiosity. We sat in a small office behind the dining room that smelled like old coffee and printer paper. The manager hovered near the door, wringing his hands. The officer who questioned me had tired eyes and a voice that didn't rise. He introduced himself, asked if I needed water. I told him, no. My purse sat on my lap like an anchor. I could feel the folded note inside it, tucked where I'd placed it, and my fingers itched to touch it just to prove it was real. I didn't. I kept my hands still. "Tell me what happened tonight," he said. So I did. I told him my son arranged the dinner. I told him I met Damon for the first time at that table. I told him Damon insisted on ordering for me and that I declined the cocktail. I told him he tasted my drink. I told him he started sweating, got confused, and collapsed. I described it like a woman describing weather. Clear, factual, no drama. I left out one thing, not because I wanted anyone harmed, not because I was protecting Damon, because I didn't know yet who the note belonged to, and I didn't know who might hear me say it. The officer listened without interrupting, pen moving steadily. When I finished, he looked up and held my eyes a beat too long, the way people do when they sense you're calmer than you should be. "You're very composed," he said. "I've had practice," I replied, and the words tasted bitter in my mouth. I didn't elaborate. I didn't offer him my grief as evidence. A second officer entered and murmured something low into the first officer's ear. I caught pieces. Hospital, still breathing, unconscious. Damon survived. Barely, but he wouldn't be answering questions tonight. Something about that landed wrong in me. Not relief, not guilt, but a cold awareness of unfinished business. An unconscious man can't explain himself, can't contradict anyone, can't say who told him to do what he did. He becomes a blank space other people fill. The first officer nodded and asked, "Does Damon Price have any medical conditions you know of?" "I just met him," I said. "I know nothing about him." He wrote that down, then leaned back slightly. We secured the security footage, he said, careful, watching my face. We also recovered a small packet under the table. We're treating this as suspicious. Suspicious. A clean word for something ugly. The manager cleared his throat at the doorway. Our cameras cover that section, he said quickly, as if proving his business was responsible could erase what happened inside it. We saved everything. The second officer stepped forward with Damon's phone in an evidence bag, held like a fragile thing. We're doing a quick look at recent calls, he said, just to establish contact patterns. The first officer asked me, do you recognize any names on his phone? I shook my head without hesitation. It was true. None of those names meant anything to me until the second officer flipped a page on his notepad, scribbling as he spoke to his partner, and I saw the words written there in a rushed hand. Uncle Harold. My breath caught, so sharply it almost made a sound. I kept my face still. I kept my mouth soft. I forced my eyes not to widen, not to flinch, not to give the room the satisfaction of seeing me break. But inside, everything tilted. The office felt smaller. The air thickened. The memory of Calvin in the car, his tight grip on the steering wheel, the way he pushed for this dinner like it mattered too much, rose up in me like a wave I'd been pretending wasn't coming. The officer continued talking, asking another question, but his words slid past me. My ears rang lightly, like my body was warning me without knowing what to warn me about. I nodded when I was supposed to nod. I answered when I was supposed to answer. I didn't react, not on the outside, but inside. The room spun. Calvin didn't speak the whole drive home. He gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright, eyes glossy in the streetlights, breathing shallow through his nose. I sat beside him in the same seat where I'd first felt that quiet wrongness settle in my chest, and I watched him the way I used to watch him when he was a teenager sneaking back in after curfew, trying hard to look calm, failing at it in his shoulders. When we pulled into my driveway, he didn't cut the engine right away. The headlights stayed on, washing my front door in a pale beam like a spotlight. He stared at it for a long time, unmoving, as if whatever waited behind that door could judge him. Inside, my house was too quiet. The clock in the hallway sounded louder than it ever had. Calvin closed the door behind us and leaned his forehead against it, one hand braced on the wood like he might slide down. He turned, finally, and looked at me with a face I hadn't seen since he was small, raw, frightened, pleading without words. "Mom," he said, and the word broke apart in his mouth. I didn't answer. I took off my coat, slowly, hung it on the hook by the entryway, and set my purse on the table like I was doing something normal. Normal actions make people talk. Silence makes them confess. Calvin followed me into the living room and stopped in the middle of it, like he didn't know where to put himself. His hands opened and closed at his sides. His eyes kept darting to my face, searching for anger, for forgiveness, for anything he could hold on to. I sat down in my chair. The same chair I'd cried in the week my husband died. The same chair I'd learned to breathe through loneliness in, and I folded my hands in my lap. He started pacing. 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. A man rehearsing his own collapse. "I swear to you," he blurted, voice sharp with panic. I didn't know anything like that was going to happen. I watched him. I let the silence stretch until he couldn't stand it. It was supposed to be a date. He said quickly, like the word date could clean the blood out of the air. "That's all. Just dinner. Damon was supposed to make you laugh. Maybe get you out the house." I thought it was harmless. "Who told you to set it up?" I said, and my voice came out quiet enough to make him lean forward to hear it. Calvin's mouth opened, then closed. His throat moved like he was swallowing a stone. His eyes filled, not with tears yet, but with the pressure of them. He dragged a hand down his face. "Uncle Harold," He whispered. The name landed heavy in the room. And for a second, I saw my husband's brother in my mind, Harold Whitaker, at family cookouts, laughing too loud, shaking hands like he was always sealing a deal. Harold at the funeral, standing near the casket with dry eyes and a tight mouth, speaking about family while watching the room like he was taking inventory. Calvin sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "He's been on me," he said, "for months." He swallowed. "I owe him." I didn't ask how. I didn't soften my face. I waited. "It was a business thing," he said, voice cracking. "I messed up. I was trying to fix it without you knowing. He covered something for me, and now he won't let it go." Calvin's fingers twisted together until his knuckles went pale. He said if I didn't do what he asked, he'd ruin me. "Ruin you how?" I said, still quiet. Calvin's eyes flicked up to mine, ashamed. "He has proof," he admitted. Something I did. Something that would destroy my marriage if it got out. His voice dropped even lower. "I made a mistake. A stupid one. And he recorded it. He kept it. He's been holding it over my head." The words sat between us like smoke. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just ugly and real. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not mercy. Just clarity. Harold had found the soft spot in my son and pressed until he moved. Calvin wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, angry at himself for crying. He told me Damon was his friend. He said Damon was safe. Said Damon could handle you gently. The way Calvin said handle made him flinch. He kept saying you were lonely and stubborn, and that this would help you. He said I should stop letting you live like a widow. I stared at him until he looked away. "I didn't know," he repeated, desperate now. "I didn't know there was anything in that drink. I didn't know he was going to." His voice collapsed. "Mom, I swear on everything. I thought I was doing what I had to do to make him back off me." I heard the truth in his panic. I also heard something else. The shape of a bigger web, one my son was caught in without understanding the edges of it. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. I didn't reach for him. I didn't comfort him the way a mother's body wants to comfort her child, even when her heart is bruised. I stayed still. Stillness is not cruelty. Sometimes it's the only way to keep yourself from breaking in the wrong direction. Calvin's phone buzzed on the couch beside him. He didn't look. Mine buzzed too, sharp in the quiet room, like a knock on the door. I picked it up, thumb hovering for one slow beat before I opened the screen. A message. Unknown number. Don't involve the police. We can fix this privately. The knock came mid-morning, sharp and confident, the kind of knock that doesn't wait to be invited. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a cup when I heard it, and something in my back tightened before my mind caught up. Calvin had left just before sunrise, exhausted and hollow-eyed, promising he would speak to his wife, promising he would fix what he could. He hugged me at the door, like he was clinging to the version of me he still believed would cover for him. I let him go without a lecture. I needed his honesty later, not his shame now. The knock came again. 2 quick hits, then a pause that felt like a decision. When I opened the door, Harold Whitaker stood on my porch like he belonged there. He wore a neat jacket over a pressed shirt, hands empty, posture relaxed, face arranged into concern. His smile was small, controlled, almost respectful, the kind of smile a man practices for church and funerals and uncomfortable family news. He stepped forward before I could decide whether to let him. "Bernice," he said softly, as if we were close. "I heard what happened. I had to come see you with my own eyes." I didn't step back, but I didn't step aside either. I held the door frame with one hand and looked at him long enough to make the air between us feel honest. Harold's eyes flicked past me into my hallway, taking in my home like he was measuring it. He didn't linger. He didn't stare. He just counted, quick and quiet. I'm all right, I said. He nodded, as if I had answered the question he actually asked. That man, he said, shaking his head slowly. That crazy stranger. People are out here doing anything these days. You can't be too careful, especially you. He emphasized you the way people do when they're reminding you of your age without saying it. I stayed still. You know him, I said, not accusing, just placing the words on the porch between us. Harold's smile didn't slip, but his eyes tightened for half a blink. Know him? He repeated, like the idea was almost offensive. Then he gave a soft laugh. No, I don't know him. I just mean, I heard the details. Folks talk. Restaurant staff talk. Next thing you know, the whole city acting like they were sitting at the table with you. He moved his hands as he spoke, calm gestures, open palms, performing harmlessness. I opened the door wider and stepped back just enough to make it clear I wasn't afraid, and he walked inside like the house had been expecting him. He didn't ask where to sit. He chose the living room, took the chair across from mine, and rested his hands on his knees like a man coming to offer comfort. If I didn't know what I knew, if I hadn't seen his name on that officer's notepad, he might have looked like family showing up in a crisis. Calvin told me you're shaken up, Harold said. My stomach turned over quietly. Calvin had not spoken to him since last night. Not in my presence. But I didn't challenge it. I only lifted my eyebrows slightly, the smallest signal that I had noticed. Harold leaned forward, voice dropping as if he was protecting me from being overheard in my own house. Did you talk to the detectives? He asked. Casual, too casual, like asking if I'd eaten breakfast. I answered the questions they asked, I said. Harold nodded slowly. Ma'am, he murmured like he was thinking. They can twist things. You know how police get when they smell a story. He sighed and looked around the room, eyes landing on my framed photos, then drifting away. You didn't say anything about the waiter, did you? My face stayed calm. My body did not. Harold kept talking, unaware, or pretending to be. I heard a waiter was watching, saw something. That's what people are saying, that the waiter noticed him drop something into your glass. He shook his head, tongue clicking like he was disgusted. Thank God that waiter had sense. My fingers tightened around the arm of my chair. I didn't move my face. The waiter's note was not public knowledge. The manager hadn't announced it to the room. The police hadn't told the crowd. The only people who knew about that note were the man who slipped it to me and the person who saw whatever happened to make him write it. And me. Harold's eyes stayed on mine, bright with concern, but there was a thin thread underneath it now. Attention sharpened, measuring my reaction. He had stepped too close to truth, and now he was watching to see if I'd flinch. I didn't give him that satisfaction. I smiled, small and polite, the way women do when they're listening to a man who thinks he's in control. People do talk, I said evenly. They say all kinds of things. Harold's shoulders eased, as if he'd just passed a test. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. Exactly, he said warmly. That's why I came. Family should handle family things before outsiders turn it into a circus. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, the paper crisp, corners sharp. He placed it on the coffee table between us like it was nothing serious at all, like it was a church program. His smile returned, soft, practiced, unthreatening. I just need you to sign one paper, he said, and slid the envelope forward with 2 fingers. Harold watched me the way men watch a lock they think they already have the key to. He didn't speak while I reached for the envelope. He only leaned back, one ankle resting on his knee, face calm, eyes bright with that patient confidence people wear when they believe they're handling you. The paper rasped softly as I slid a finger under the flap. Everything about it looked official on purpose. Thick stock, printed return address, neat black type. He wanted the envelope to do the intimidating for him. Inside were 2 pages, stapled at the corner, a letterhead across the top that made my eyes narrow. It wasn't from a bank. It wasn't from court. It was from an office that specialized in estate services, the kind of place families use when someone dies and the living start arguing over what the dead left behind. The language was polite, dense, arranged in clean paragraphs, meant to exhaust you before you reach the part that matters. I read slowly, lips closed, face relaxed. The first paragraph was harmless. An update, a routine review, a family estate matter. The second paragraph thanked me for cooperation in maintaining accurate records. It was written like the decision had already been made. Then my eyes found the section Harold wanted me to reach. A release. Not loud, not obvious. A simple statement authorizing the transfer and consolidation of certain holdings and granting permission for designated family representatives to manage and execute related transactions. A person skimming would see housekeeping. A person paying attention would see a door opening. I didn't look up right away. I let my eyes trace the lines again, slower this time, making sure my understanding was solid before I allowed any emotion to rise. My husband's name appeared once, formal, in the middle of the page, like a memory being used as leverage. The line beneath it said something about remaining matters. The signature block at the bottom held my name, printed neatly, and next to it a blank line for my hand to make it real. Harold cleared his throat gently, as if he didn't want to rush me, but also didn't want me sitting with it too long. It's just legal housekeeping. He said, since your husband passed, there are still a few loose ends. This makes things smoother, keeps the family protected. Protected. The word sat wrong. I kept reading, pretending the paper was ordinary. Designated family representatives. I repeated softly, who are those? Harold smiled, easy. Me and Calvin, he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You know, Calvin's busy. This just allows us to handle what needs handling without bothering you with the details. Bothering you. Like my life was a stack of paperwork they were kindly taking off my hands. I set the pages down on my lap and looked at him. I'll need a copy. I said simply, I'll review it with my lawyer. The temperature in the room changed. Not dramatically. Just a thin shift, like a curtain moving when the window opens. Harold's smile stayed, but it tightened at the edges. His eyes narrowed in a way that would have looked like concentration to anyone who didn't know him. He leaned forward again, voice dropping as if he was trying to keep me calm. Now, Bernice, he said gently, no need to make this bigger than it is. Lawyers slow everything down. And you don't need that stress right now. After what happened last night, he paused, letting the words hang, using my fear like a hand on my shoulder. Let's just get this signed, so we can keep things orderly. Orderly. Controlled. I held his gaze, and let a small sigh escape, like he'd convinced me. I nodded once, slow. All right, I said softly. If it's just housekeeping. Harold's shoulders loosened. Relief rose in his face before he could hide it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen, already uncapped, and placed it on the table like a gift. That small detail, pen ready, decision assumed, made my stomach turn again. He had expected this. He had counted on my exhaustion. I picked up the pen, but I didn't sign. Not yet. Let me get my glasses, I said, patting my chest like I'd misplaced them. I stood, pen still in my hand, paper folded against my palm. Harold nodded, smiling again, satisfied. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. He believed he had me moving exactly where he wanted. In the hallway, I moved quickly but quietly. My phone was on the small table, near the kitchen. I lifted it, angled the document under the light, and took 2 clear photos, front page, signature page, making sure the letterhead and the representatives section were visible. My hands were steady now. Fear had done its job. It had delivered me into calculation. I slid the phone back, returned to the living room, and sat again. I lowered my eyes to the paper as if I was preparing to sign. Harold leaned forward, watching my hand. Then the front door opened behind him. Calvin's voice came from the entryway, strained and hoarse, like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he called. Harold's head snapped slightly, not enough to look guilty, just enough to show he hadn't expected company. I turned my head slowly. Calvin stepped into the living room, eyes moving from Harold to the document in my hands. His gaze locked onto the words at the top, then dropped to the signature line, then flicked back to Harold's face. His mouth fell open a fraction. His voice didn't rise. It went quiet in a way that felt dangerous. "What is that?" Calvin asked, and the look in his eyes said he finally understood the trap he'd walked me into. The house had been too loud since Calvin left again. Not with sound. There was no music playing, no television on, but with the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own thoughts, like footsteps. Harold's envelope sat on my coffee table where he had left it, the pages back inside, the flap tucked like nothing dangerous had ever touched my living room. I didn't throw it away. I didn't shred it. I let it sit there like evidence. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is resist the urge to clean up what tried to dirty you. I was standing at the sink when the knock came. Not the confident knock Harold used. This one was hesitant, spaced out like the person on the other side was deciding whether to leave. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door without rushing. My body had learned something over the last 24 hours. Sudden movement is a kind of panic, and panic is information. I opened the door and saw Miles. He looked different outside the restaurant. Smaller somehow, younger. The apron was gone. The crisp posture was gone. He wore a plain jacket, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes tired like he hadn't slept. He kept his hands visible at his sides, as if he didn't want to scare me. For a second, we just looked at each other. The porch air cool between us, the memory of the dining room still sharp in my chest. "I'm sorry to come like this," he said quietly. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't ask how he found my address. In that moment, the question felt like a luxury. I could see fear in the way he held himself, in the way his gaze kept flicking past my shoulder to the street. Fear doesn't need an explanation to be recognized. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He hesitated, then crossed the threshold quickly, like he didn't want to be visible on my porch any longer than necessary. I closed the door behind him and turned the lock. Miles exhaled, a shaky breath he'd been holding too long. "I went to the police," he said, words spilling out before I could offer him a seat. "Last night, after they left the restaurant, I told them what I saw. I gave a statement. Relief rose in me like warm water and immediately met something colder underneath. Relief meant I wasn't alone in what I knew. Fear meant whoever set this up might now know he'd spoken. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said, and the words were simple but heavy. Miles swallowed. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I did it because it wasn't right. I saw him with your drink. I saw him lean in, fast, like he'd done it before. I wasn't 100% sure what it was, but I knew it wasn't normal. His voice thinned. I didn't want to watch somebody get hurt and live with that." He sat on the edge of my couch without being invited, like his legs couldn't hold him. His knee bounced once, then stopped when he noticed. He forced his hands still. "I think someone followed me after I left the station," he said, and the words landed in the room like a dropped plate. Not right away, but after I got off the bus. A car slowed down, stayed behind me too long. Then it turned when I turned. I might be overthinking, but his eyes lifted to mine, and I saw he wasn't the type to dramatize. He was the type to doubt himself, even when he was right. "You're not overthinking," I said, and my voice surprised even me with how certain it sounded. Miles reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card, holding it between his fingers like it could protect him. A detective's name and number were printed on it, along with a badge number. He didn't push it toward me dramatically. He simply placed it on the coffee table, gentle and careful. "He said he needs you," Miles told me. "He said your official account matters. He said there's footage, but your words matter too. He said if you're willing to come in, it helps them move faster." I looked at the card, then at the envelope on the table, then at Miles' face. The pieces were stacking now, not into a neat picture, but into a shape I recognized, pressure closing in from all sides. Harold's paper, Damon's collapse, Calvin's shame, Miles' fear, the message that told me not to involve the police. The way Harold had said family should handle family things. He hadn't meant peace. He'd meant control. Miles' eyes shifted to the envelope. "Is that—" he started, then stopped himself, respect pulling his words back. He didn't ask. He didn't pry. He simply looked like a man standing too close to something dangerous and realizing it had followed him into a stranger's home. I sat down across from him and folded my hands, letting my face soften just enough to keep him from feeling alone. "You did the right thing," I said again, quieter this time. Miles nodded, but he didn't look comforted. "I just don't want them to think I'm lying," he admitted. "That man, he looked normal. If I didn't see what I saw, I wouldn't believe it either." I stared at the detective's card until my mind settled into a decision. There are moments when you can keep surviving quietly, and moments when quiet survival becomes permission for someone else to try again. I felt the line between those moments. "I'll go," I said. Miles' shoulders dropped in visible relief, like my words took weight off his chest. But I added, and the single syllable changed the room. Not to sit in there and talk in circles. Not to let this drag into weeks while people get bold. Miles watched me, waiting. I leaned forward slightly, voice low, calm, certain. "If I walk into that station," I said, "it ends tonight." The police station smelled like disinfectant and tired air. Everything was bright in a way that made you feel exposed. White walls, hard floors, lights that didn't soften for anyone's grief. Miles sat beside me in the waiting area, hands folded so tightly his knuckles looked dry. He kept his eyes down, like he didn't want to be recognized for doing the right thing. I watched the door every time it opened, not because I was afraid of officers, but because I was aware now that danger doesn't always come with a mask. Sometimes it comes wearing family language and carrying paperwork. A detective called my name and led us through a hallway into a small room with a table, 2 chairs, and a screen mounted on the wall. He wasn't the same officer from the restaurant. This one had a steady voice and the calm of a man who'd seen too many people try to talk their way out of what cameras already captured. He introduced himself, offered water again, and I refused again. My mouth didn't feel dry. My heart felt clear. "We pulled the footage from the restaurant," he said. "We want you to see it." He didn't frame it like a favor. He framed it like truth. The video began with the wide view of the dining room. There I was at the table, posture composed, hands in my lap. Damon across from me, laughing, leaning in, behaving like an ordinary man on an ordinary date. It was strange watching myself from above, like my body belonged to someone else. Strange seeing how calm I looked while my insides were trying not to splinter. The detective tapped a button, and the view changed, closer now, our table centered. Damon's smile was on full display. I watched him reach for the drinks. I watched his eyes flick around the room, quick and practiced. And then I saw it. He leaned forward as if he was adjusting something on the table. His hand dipped out of sight for a moment, then rose with something small pinched between his fingers. He moved fast, but the camera didn't miss it. His hand hovered over my glass, and his fingers opened. Something dropped in, something so small it didn't splash, didn't change the color, didn't make the glass look different. He stirred once, casually, like a man mixing sugar into coffee. Then he sat back and smiled at me, like he hadn't just aimed for my life. Miles let out a sound beside me, a tight breath that didn't become a word. He didn't look away. He watched it like he needed to punish himself with the proof. The detective paused the footage. "You see that?" he asked. "I see it," I said, and my voice stayed steady. The steadiness wasn't strength. It was containment. It was me refusing to give this room the satisfaction of watching me unravel. "We recovered residue from the glass," the detective said. He didn't use big words. He didn't try to impress me with science. It's consistent with a strong sedative, something that can drop a person fast. It can also slow the heart if the dose is wrong, or if the person has certain conditions. I thought of Damon's laughter breaking, the sweat, the slump, the way his body folded without warning. A sedative meant sleep. A slowed heart meant no waking up. "And you're sure you didn't drink from that glass?" the detective asked. I turned my head slightly. "I didn't," I said. The answer was true, and it wasn't the whole truth. "Not yet." The detective nodded and clicked the remote again. The footage jumped ahead. Damon lifting the glass. Damon drinking. Damon's face changing. The collapse. The scramble. The police entering. My son's panic. His hands hovering helplessly. It looked worse on screen than it had felt in the moment, because the camera showed how quickly the whole room turned into chaos. The detective stopped the video and set the remote down. "He's still in the hospital," he said. "Unconscious. But he lived." I didn't react to that either. My feelings about Damon were complicated in a way I didn't want to explore in that room. A man who tried to harm me was still a man with a body on a bed. I wasn't interested in revenge that required me to enjoy suffering. I was interested in stopping the hand that set this in motion. The detective slid a folder across the table. Inside was a printout, Damon's call history, names and numbers listed in clean rows. "We got into his phone," the detective said. "He spoke to someone repeatedly before last night. We confronted him with the footage, with the packet we found, with the timeline. He didn't hold up long." Miles' shoulders tensed. "He admitted he put something in your drink," the detective continued. "He said he was told it would only scare you, make you feel unwell. He said he didn't expect it to go that far. A scare, a lie designed to soften intent." My stomach tightened. Anyway, a man doesn't drop sedative into a stranger's drink to play games. He does it because someone promised him something worth the risk. The detective pointed to one of the numbers on the page. "This," he said. "Do you recognize it?" My eyes moved down the list and stopped where his finger rested. No name attached, just a number. But beneath it in smaller print was the note the officer had typed after tracing it. Harold Whitaker. The room didn't spin this time. It went cold. The detective watched my face closely. "We'll need your statement," he said, voice firm but not unkind. "If we're going to get a warrant, it has to be solid." Harold Whitaker got arrested in the middle of doing what he always did, talking like a man who believed his words could bend reality. I didn't see it from the inside. I didn't need to. The detectives told me where he would be, and I asked them to let me watch from a distance. Not because I wanted a front row seat to his humiliation, but because I wanted to see with my own eyes that the power he'd carried into my living room could be carried out of his life in handcuffs. His office sat in a strip of buildings that looked clean on purpose. Glass doors, polished signs, parking spaces angled like everyone was expected to behave. Harold worked out of a small suite that always smelled faintly of fresh carpet and old confidence. The kind of place he liked, where he could play businessman and family man in the same breath. I sat in my car across the lot with the engine off. The window was cracked just enough to let in cold air. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady. Calvin stood near the entrance, shoulders stiff, his body half turned toward the door, like he might bolt. He hadn't wanted to come. I hadn't forced him. He showed up anyway, because guilt has a way of dragging you to the places you least want to stand. A woman walked out carrying a folder, laughing into her phone. A delivery man passed by. Ordinary life, moving around something poisonous, unaware of it. Calvin stared at the door, like it might open and swallow him. Then the unmarked cars slid in. No sirens. No flashing drama. Just two vehicles pulling into spaces like they belonged there. Two plainclothes officers stepped out first, scanning the lot with quick eyes. Another car arrived behind them. Doors opened. More officers. Calm faces. Controlled movements. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They walked with the quiet confidence of people who already knew the answer to every question. Calvin's head turned. His posture changed. His chest lifted once like he'd been punched with air. I watched him from my car, and for a second I wanted to get out, to stand beside him, to let him feel less alone. But this was part of his consequence. Sometimes love is not stepping in. Sometimes love is letting a person stand inside the truth they helped create. The officers entered Harold's building. The glass door swung shut behind them, and the world went still for a beat, like even the parking lot was holding its breath. Calvin's hands curled into fists at his sides. I couldn't see his face clearly from where I sat, but I could read his body. He looked like a boy again, watching adults handle a disaster he didn't understand until it was too late. Minutes passed, not many, but enough for time to feel thick. Then the door opened again. Harold came out between two officers. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His suit jacket was still on, but the collar sat slightly crooked, like his dignity had been tugged loose. His face wasn't furious. It was stunned, eyes wide, mouth tight, as if he couldn't believe the world had stopped accepting his version of events. He glanced around the lot, searching for someone. Not for help, for confirmation, for the face he expected to see standing by him. When his eyes landed on Calvin, something moved through Harold's expression, quick and sharp, like a warning that didn't need words. Calvin's knees bent slightly. He didn't step forward. He didn't step back. He just stared, frozen in the space between fear and betrayal. Harold's mouth opened as if he might speak Calvin's name, but one officer guided him forward, steering him toward the car. The moment Harold's body lowered into the back seat, the air shifted. Not relief, not celebration, just the heavy certainty that something irreversible had happened. Calvin finally turned his head, scanning the lot, and his gaze lifted toward my car. He found me. I saw the horror in his eyes, the shame, the realization that he had been a tool in a man's hand. His lips moved like he wanted to say something, but he couldn't. The truth was too large to speak in a parking lot. I nodded once, not forgiveness, not punishment, just acknowledgement. Later, the detective called me with the part that made Harold's family concerns sound as ugly as they were. We pulled his accounts. The detective said, "There are transfers. Multiple. Going to Damon Price." He didn't say it with triumph. He said it like a man stating weather again. Proof, not drama. Money doesn't lie the way people do. Money leaves tracks even when mouths stay clean. By that afternoon, the story had started moving faster than my own breath. Someone saw the arrest. Someone recorded a shaky video from a distance. Someone texted someone else. Family members who hadn't called me in months suddenly found reasons to check in. Church ladies who could smell scandal, like perfume, started speaking my name in low voices. My phone buzzed with messages from numbers I didn't recognize, people fishing for details wrapped in concern. I didn't answer most of them. Calvin didn't come back to my house that night. He didn't call. He didn't text. His wife called once, voice tight and confused, asking if I'd heard from him. I told her the truth. I hadn't. After that, the silence grew. By the end of the second day, Calvin was still gone. Calvin came back on the second night, a little after midnight, the way children come home when they know they've broken something that can't be fixed with daylight. I didn't hear his car pull into the driveway. I heard the front steps creak, slow, careful, then the soft rattle of a key that didn't go in smoothly the first time. The porch light spilled into the hallway when the door opened and his shadow stretched long across my floor like a question he didn't know how to ask. I stayed in my chair in the living room, lamp on, television off. I hadn't been sleeping much, not because I couldn't, but because my body refused to fully relax inside a story that was still moving. The air held the kind of tension that makes you listen to every small sound, the same way you listen when a storm is near, but hasn't arrived. Calvin stepped in and stopped when he saw me. He looked thinner than he had 2 days ago, like fear had been chewing at him. His eyes were red around the edges. His clothes were wrinkled, collar slightly stretched, as if he'd been sleeping in a car or on somebody's couch without really sleeping at all. He held his hands down by his sides, empty, palms open, like he was showing me he'd come with nothing but truth. "Mom," he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. I nodded once, giving him permission to come closer without giving him comfort. He moved into the room and stood near the couch, not sitting. He didn't deserve to sit in my home, like he was still safe inside it. I didn't know where to go, he admitted. His voice sounded scraped, like it had been used too much, and not for good reasons. I've been driving, thinking, trying to figure out how I got this far. "You got this far because you kept choosing quiet," I said, and my tone didn't rise. Quiet choices still make noise in the end. Calvin's throat worked. He stepped forward, then stopped himself, as if he didn't know whether he had the right to stand close to me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I watched him the way you watch a man who says sorry only after consequences arrive. Sorry is a beginning, not a clean ending. "Tell me everything," I said. Calvin swallowed hard. "The debt wasn't just a debt," he began, eyes dropping to the carpet. "It started as one, but then Harold turned it into a leash." He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at it like he was trying to tear shame out by the roots. I borrowed money from him to cover a mistake at work. I thought I could pay it back quick. Then my wife found out I'd been messing around. Just once. One stupid night. Harold heard about it through somebody he knows. He offered to help. Said he'd talk to my wife. Smooth things over, keep it quiet. I didn't move. I didn't blink fast. I let him speak until he felt the weight of his own words. "He didn't help," Calvin said, voice cracking. "He recorded me. He set me up. He made sure I knew he had proof. And then he started asking for things. Little things at first. Calls. Errands. Favors. He'd say, 'Family helps family.'" Calvin's eyes lifted briefly, wet and angry. Then he demanded the dinner. He said you needed to be distracted. He kept saying if you were out in public, you'd stop being so careful. He said I was keeping you stuck in the past. My fingers tightened around the armrest. And you believed him. I wanted it to be true, Calvin admitted, and that honesty sounded worse than any lie. Because if it was about you being happy, then I wasn't a bad son. I was just pushing you forward. His voice dropped, but I also wanted him off my back. I wanted my marriage to survive. I wanted my life to stop feeling like it could be destroyed with one video. He wiped his face roughly with his sleeve. When I saw him holding your glass, he whispered. My stomach dropped. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I didn't know his voice broke hard. I didn't know he'd try to kill you. The word kill sat in my living room like a curse. Calvin's shoulders shook once. He pressed his hands to his face, trying to hold himself together. I could have cost you your life, he said, voice muffled. I almost handed you over. I waited. Silence does what comfort can't do. It forces a person to face what they've said without being rescued from it. Then I spoke quiet and clean. I didn't drink it. I said. Calvin's head lifted slowly. His eyes searched my face, confused and desperate at the same time. But the footage. He put it in my glass. I said, yes, but I didn't drink it. Calvin stared like he couldn't fit the pieces together. I made it look like I would, I continued, and my voice stayed steady. I let him believe he was steering me. Then I let him take the sip first. Calvin's mouth fell open. His breath hitched. He didn't look relieved at first. He looked horrified in a new way, by the realization of how close it had been, how sharp the edge was that I'd walked without him even knowing. His eyes filled again, this time not just with guilt, but with awe, like he was seeing his mother as a person for the first time. Not a role. You saved yourself, he whispered. And you, I said simply. Calvin sank onto the couch, like his legs finally gave out. He covered his face again, shoulders shaking, not with panic this time, but with the kind of crying that comes when a man realizes he's been weak in a place he should have been strong. I watched him, and something in me shifted, not forgiveness, not yet but a small opening where it could someday grow. I stood up slowly and moved closer, not to hug him, but to stand in front of him like a boundary and a blessing at the same time. My voice dropped low, firm, and final. Court doesn't feel like justice when you first walk into it. It feels like waiting. The benches are hard, the air is dry, and everything moves on someone else's schedule. People speak in calm voices about ugly things like they're reading grocery lists. There's no music, no swelling moment, just paper, time, and the quiet certainty that somebody's life is about to be measured and named. I sat in the second row with my hands folded in my lap, back straight, eyes forward. Calvin sat beside me, shoulders tense, jaw set like he was holding himself together by force. He didn't touch me. I didn't touch him. We were close enough to share the same air, but not close enough to pretend this hadn't cracked us open. Miles sat a few rows behind, wearing a simple button-down that looked too big in the shoulders, his face drawn tight with nerves. He wasn't built for attention. He was built for work. But he had stepped into the light anyway. Harold Whitaker entered in a suit that tried to make him look like the man he used to be. The cuffs were pressed. The tie was straight. His hair was combed neatly, but none of it could put the power back on his face. He looked smaller behind the defense table, not weak, still proud, but stripped of that casual authority he'd carried into my living room like a coat. When? His eyes swept the courtroom. They slid over me without landing. He didn't nod. He didn't sneer. He simply refused to meet my gaze, like eye contact would make it real. Damon Price was there too, seated with his lawyer, pale and careful, moving like his body remembered the night it betrayed him. He looked at the table more than he looked at people. He didn't look like a mastermind. He looked like a man who had tried to play dangerous and gotten burned by it. When the judge entered, Everyone stood. When the judge sat, everyone sat. The rhythm of court is obedience, and I felt that obedience settle into the room, like dust. The prosecutor spoke first, laying out the bones of the case. The dinner, the drink, the collapse, the proof. No dramatics, just facts that had already done the damage. Miles was called early. He walked to the witness stand like he was stepping into water. He couldn't see the bottom of. His hands trembled when he swore to tell the truth. His voice shook at first, but when he began describing what he saw, Damon leaning in, the small movement over my glass, the way Damon's eyes kept checking the room, something steadied in him. It wasn't courage the way people think courage looks. It was responsibility. He didn't embellish. He didn't perform. He simply said what happened and let the simplicity of it carry weight. The defense attorney tried to twist it. "You were busy serving tables," she said. "You could have misunderstood." Miles didn't argue. He didn't get offended. He only looked forward and said, "I know what I saw." That sentence landed heavier than any speech. Then they played the CCTV. The courtroom darkened slightly as the screen lit up. I watched my own face again from above, watched Damon's hand hover, watched the drop into the glass, watched the casual stir, watched the smile that followed like nothing had happened. A murmur moved through the courtroom, quiet, controlled, still shocked. Harold didn't look up. He kept his gaze fixed on the table in front of him, like staring hard enough could erase the footage. The defense tried again. It was an accident, she claimed. He believed it was harmless. A prank. A mistake. The prosecutor didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She stood, calm, and asked the questions that make lies collapse without drama. If it was harmless, she said, why did he hide his hand? Why did he check the room? Why did he call Harold Whitaker multiple times before the dinner? Why did money move from Harold Whitaker's accounts to Damon Price? Her voice stayed level as she placed the evidence down one by one like stones in a line. A bank record was shown. Then another. Transfers in amounts that didn't fit a friendly loan between strangers. Dates that lined up too neatly with planning. Harold's mouth tightened when those records came up. His fingers curled around a pen like he wanted to snap it, but he didn't. He simply sat there, shoulders stiff, eyes still refusing mine. When the motive was spoken, the courtroom felt colder. Inheritance greed, resentment, a brother dissatisfied with what he received after his elder brother died. A man who decided the widow standing in the way was a problem to solve. The prosecutor didn't call Harold evil. She didn't need to. She called him deliberate. When the judge delivered the sentence, there was no cinematic pause. No long speech. Just words that landed and stayed. Harold's shoulders dropped slightly, like something inside him. Finally accepted what his mouth never would. Calvin inhaled sharply beside me. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply listened, letting the finalities settle in my bones. When it was over, people stood and began gathering bags and coats as if they were leaving a meeting. Miles stepped down from the stand and avoided everyone's eyes, but I caught his gaze for 1 second and nodded. It wasn't gratitude as a performance. It was acknowledgement as truth. Outside the courthouse, daylight hit hard. Cameras flashed. Microphones appeared like weapons held politely. Reporters called out names. Someone said Ms. Holloway, and the sound of my own name in that public air made my skin tighten. I kept walking, silent, straight-backed, Calvin close behind me, and the cameras kept flashing. Weeks passed, not cleanly, not like a page turning, but like water wearing down stone. The house stayed the same, the room still holding the shape of my husband's absence, but something in me shifted, subtle at first, then steadier. The phone stopped buzzing as much. The church ladies stopped pretending their concern wasn't curiosity. The reporters moved on to fresher stories. Life did what it always does. It kept going, even when you're still learning how to breathe inside what happened. The morning I went to the cemetery, the sky was pale and quiet, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. The grass was damp, and my shoes sank slightly as I walked between rows of stones. I held a small bundle of white flowers in my hand, stems wrapped in a paper towel from my kitchen. Simple, not dramatic. My husband never liked excess. He liked things that meant something without trying too hard to prove it. His stone sat where it always had, steady and patient. I stood in front of it and let the silence do what it does best, bring everything you've been avoiding back to the surface. My throat tightened as I read his name again. Even after 4 years, there was still a part of me that expected him to be somewhere nearby, walking up behind me with that quiet, steady presence he had, hand resting lightly at the small of my back like a promise. I knelt carefully, feeling my knees complain, and brushed a few stray leaves away from the base of the stone. The cemetery was empty enough that I could hear a bird settle in a tree, wings fluttering once, then stillness. I placed the flowers down and rested my palm on the cool granite. I almost came to you early. I whispered. My voice sounded small in the open air, like it didn't want to disturb the dead. That's the truth of it. I didn't cry. Tears didn't feel like the right language anymore. What I felt was heavier than sadness and sharper than anger. I felt the strange kind of gratitude that comes when you survive something that was meant to erase you. I felt the ache of knowing my own child had helped push me toward it, even if he hadn't understood what he was doing. I felt the quiet pride of having listened to my instincts when everything around me was trying to quiet them. I didn't do it loud. I told the stone softly. I didn't do it messy. I stayed awake. A footstep sounded behind me, slow and respectful. I didn't turn quickly. I already knew who it was. Calvin had been calling more often, coming by more often, not to demand forgiveness, not to force closeness, but to sit in the same room as me and let time do the work he couldn't rush. He had told his wife the truth. He had taken the shame home where it belonged and stopped trying to hide it in my lap. He was still my son. He was also still the man who had driven me to that restaurant. Both things were true, and peace requires you to live inside truth, not escape it. Calvin stopped beside me and didn't speak at first. He looked down at the stone, and I saw his throat move. He swallowed hard, hands shoved into his coat pockets like he didn't trust them to behave. Then he knelt beside me, slow, careful, like he didn't want to startle my grief. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I didn't answer with forgiveness. I answered with honesty. "I know," I said. His hand reached for mine, hesitant. He didn't grab. He offered. I let my fingers slide into his, and the contact felt like something fragile being carried gently instead of something fixed. He held my hand the way he used to hold it crossing streets when he was little, like he understood now that love doesn't protect you if it refuses to face danger. We stayed like that for a while, two people kneeling in the damp grass, neither of us trying to fill the silence with explanations. The wind moved lightly through the trees. Somewhere far off, a car door shut. Life continued in small sounds. When we stood, my knees stiff, Calvin steadied my elbow without making a show of it. We walked back toward the car, and I felt something in my chest loosen, not the whole knot, but a thread of it. Back at home, a plain envelope waited in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written neatly on the front. My stomach tightened out of old habit, but when I opened it, the paper inside wasn't official. It wasn't threatening. It was simple, like the man who wrote it. It was for Miles. He didn't write a long letter. He didn't pour his heart out. He wrote the way working people write when they're trying to be respectful and quick. He told me He was leaving town. He said the last few weeks had made him realize he didn't want to stay stuck in the same place, looking over his shoulder. He had applied to culinary school and been accepted. He said he'd be starting fresh, learning the craft the way he'd always wanted, and he thanked me not for saving him, but for believing him when he spoke. At the bottom, he wrote one line that sat in my hands like warmth. I hope you keep trusting your instincts. They saved you. I folded the note carefully and slid it into my drawer where I keep things that matter. Not trophies, not revenge souvenirs. Proof that ordinary people still choose right when it costs them something. That night, I stood at my kitchen window and watched the street lights hum. I could still feel the echo of fear in my body if I let myself. I could still feel the betrayal like an old bruise. Trust wasn't something I had fully rebuilt. It may never be, but strength was not in question anymore. Strength was the only thing that had remained faithful. I turned off the light and let the darkness settle gently around me, not like a threat, but like rest. I didn't take revenge. I just refused to drink what wasn't meant for me.